Husky fans, we heard you. Locked On Huskies is here, and we're so excited to get into it. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about Joel Klatt, who had the Huskies ranked inside the top 10. And this is just going to be a fantastic 2023 season. So let's break it all down right here.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Lars, we're finally here. Welcome to Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We both write for Inside the Husky with Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation. And we're so excited to be here to finally be able to break down the Huskies. And let's just a quick reminder here that this episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. And to do that, you can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Now, Lars, Joel Klatt had the Huskies ranked at number 6 on Monday when he put out his initial rankings with Fox Sports, and he called the Huskies a dark horse to make the college football playoff. Now, I agree that the Huskies should be ranked pretty high from what we've seen so far through the first 5 fall practices, but I really don't agree with the term dark horse because any team in the top 10 really can't be considered a dark horse. What are some of the things that you've seen that might have stood out to you through these first couple of practices?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's kind of interesting is for the most part, the team that they've finished with the number 8 ranking in the country is back this season. The only couple of differences are 3 offensive line spots and 2 running back spots, or 1 or 2 running back spots. But most of the guys are back. And so it's weird to have a team that finished in the top 10 be considered the dark horse, especially when you also finish that sentence with also a potential Heisman candidate. So it's kind of hard. You know, yes, everybody knows Caleb Williams, but Michael Penix has basically always been right there behind him. So it's not, I don't know how much of a dark horse, but I mean, we've basically seen the exact same thing we saw last fall, except Michael Penix has had a few days off.
Right. And, you know, just going off Michael Penix, we can talk a little bit about just not only him, but the receiving core that the Huskies are bringing back. And honestly, is it really that much of a stretch to say that it's better than last year's? Because from what we've seen, Rome Odunze looks bigger and better than ever. There's some reports that he's out there. Not only is he clocking in a 4.34 40-yard dash time, but he's weighing in 215 pounds. He went for 1,000 yards last season. Jalen McMillan, he went for 1,000 yards last season. Jalen Polk is also back. That's the starting 3 receivers. Polk had almost 700 yards last year. And then they're bringing in 2 guys in Jeremy Bernard, who's a sophomore transfer from Michigan State, who just looked phenomenal as a freshman in the limited time that he did get to play over in the Big Ten. He decided to come back after he originally signed with the University of Washington. But then we can also just kind of look at Denzel Boston as well, who's a redshirt freshman from nearby Emerald Ridge. And he has just been, in my opinion, he's been the best player that we've seen through fall camp this year.
Yeah, and I mean, what's ironic is you could probably say Denzel had more of an impact at Washington than Jeremy had at Michigan State last season. And that's a testament. That's not a knock on Jeremy. That's a testament to how well Denzel took that coaching from Jamarcus Shepard early in camp, how he came into camp sharp, and he's continued that on. It almost seemed like he played so much last season. He is a true sophomore, and that's – even though he doesn't have the catch and receptions and all that, he's definitely shown that he's able to play when the big moments matter. I mean, he was on the first play for the Oregon touchdown last year as a blocking receiver. And I think that's what Kalen has shown, much like Chris Peterson, where if you can carry over the small little details, you're going to play early and play often. And Denzel showed that.
No, absolutely. And I think that I don't know if we're going to see 2 1,000-yard receivers again this year, but because of that deep complement of receivers. And then we didn't even really get into talk about the running backs because Cam Davis looks really impressive. He's coming back. He scored 13 touchdowns last season. And then a guy that I'm really, really high on is Dylan Johnson, who transferred in from Mississippi State. I want to give a quick shout out to Tony Castricone, the broadcaster for UW, who put out a great trivia stat that Dylan Johnson is actually the leader on the team in receptions. And, you know, you can thank the late Mike Leach for his air raid style offense at Mississippi State for all of those touches. But I think that he just looks like a different player. And he's going to be a guy in this offense who, once he's fully healthy, still coming off a knee injury, that's going to make a huge impact in this offense.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Dylan told me after he committed back in early January, February, was he said, I want to be shown as a full all-around back, as a guy that can do receiving and can also run between the tackles. And I think that's what Washington was missing last season. Wayne Talapapa, who came from Virginia, was a good kind of stopgap, a good complement guy, but he didn't have the full arsenal that Dylan Johnson possesses, as you mentioned. I mean, we're watching him catch passes in drills today. He just looks like a naturally fluid receiver who happens to play running back, but he's also built like a train. So he's able to run between the tackles, and he's not a guy who is, he took the pounding in the SEC. So I think now he's looking to show his full game in the Pac-12, and that's to Washington's benefit.
No, you're absolutely right. And speaking of naturally fluid, one thing that I always feel naturally fluid when I'm wearing are my Birddogs. I just got some shorts and some pants in the other day, and I was able to wear the pants to practice on Sunday. And I felt really fluid, and I felt like I could move really well. I know they made me look good, and they fit slimmer. And I'm a guy. I've got some pretty big thighs, which is really annoying when I have to wear jeans. So I'm really glad I got to wear my Birddogs instead and just go with those. And the shorts, they also just fit way better. And there are so many that are just made with that stiff restricting cotton that I can't get behind those. And they're just, not my favorite. But I think Birddogs will be your new favorite shorts. And if you really want to go get a pair yourself, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege or enter the promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat when you check out with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege or enter the promo code LockedOnCollege when you check out for a free white tech hat, and you won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you that. So as we kind of move in here, what do you think? There are a lot of things that could go right this year. What are some of the things that you think might go wrong?
Well, I mean, it starts up front. If Washington can solidify the offensive line and prove that they're able to replace Corey Luciano at center with Mateo Mailer, for instance, and Nate Caleppo and Julius Billow, or whoever ends up playing at guard, I think if they can get that sorted out, that's where it's going to live and die. Because if the offensive line doesn't play to the standard that they played last year, which only allowed 4 sacks to Michael Penix all season, and yes, they were still good in the run game. They didn't have the running backs like we mentioned this fall. They did have Cam Davis, but again, I think Dylan's going to prove to be a massive addition here. But that still all starts with the offensive line. I have faith that Scott Huff is going to get the right 5. I think Mateo Bailey has pretty much all but secured that center spot. I think the question is going to be who ends up backing him up. Is it going to be Landon or Parker Brailsford? And who's honestly going to play at left guard? Is it going to be Julius Buelo? Can Gary and Hatchett take away that spot? Does Nate Caleppo move over from right to left again? There's a lot of ways that Washington can split the offensive line, but for me, that's where it starts.
Can't forget about guard Bemelar either. And I think that one of the things that we have to talk about when it comes to going wrong is last year, this was one of the healthiest teams in the country. And you never wish injury upon anyone, but you have to be prepared. And I think that this team can be prepared, but there's one position where one major injury might derail the season, in my opinion, and that's at edge. Because obviously, Braylon Trice, first-team All-American, fantastic player. He's coming back. We saw him talking to scouts out there today. He looks like a future lock of a first-round pick. Zion Tupelo-Fatui across from him. He's struggled with injuries a little bit over the last couple of seasons, but he looks healthy. He looks like he could have a big year in front of him. But after that, there's a lot of talent, and I will be the first person to tell you that there's a lot of talent behind those two guys in the edge room, but it's a little scary when you have to think about the inexperience there. First off, Zach Durfee, who just looks like a freak of nature athletically when you look at him. 6'4", 260 pounds, apparently has a 38-inch vertical jump, which just blows my mind for a dude that size, who came into the University of Sioux Falls, shout out to Kalen DeBoer's alma mater, as a quarterback. And then they switch him over to the defensive line, just blows it up in his first year, and comes to UW, which is awesome. You love to see that. But 1 year at, I get this wrong all the time. They are an FCS school now. They were an NAIA school when Kalen DeBoer was there. So, I get that mixed up a lot. But not necessarily the same level of competition as having to go up against Oregon's offensive line or USC's offensive line. So that's something to consider. Lance Holtzclaw, another one of just my favorite players to watch. He's put on a lot of weight. He's got awesome burst. He looks really good, but he hasn't really gotten many snaps yet. Same thing can be said about Maurice Himes, who might even be more athletic than Zach Durfee. I really don't know if that's that hot of a take at this point, but he's an athletic freak coming out of Germany. Just is a very raw player when he got to Santa Margarita Catholic and just has not played a lot of football in his life. And when you look at him, you're just like, is that dude a top 10 overall pick in the next draft because of just his build physically? But you can tell that he just doesn't have a lot of football under his belt. And an injury to one of those top guys can just really derail that. And that's something that concerns me. And another thing I feel that we should talk about, and I'll give you the floor here because I know that you got a couple of guys in that room who you're super high on, is the secondary. The secondary gave up a lot of yards last year. Yeah, they didn't necessarily give up a ton of points, but they gave up a lot of yards, and that's something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of weird. Washington has always hung its hat on defense, at least over the past 5-10 years, on the secondary. And that's really actually kind of the question mark of this team is they bring in Jabbar Muhammad, cornerback from Oklahoma State, to kind of shore up the outside boundaries. They moved Mish Powell, who was an outside corner, but he was a better run corner than he was in coverage. That's not to say he was terrible in pass coverage, but because I think everyone kind of struggled last year in pass coverage, and Mish was probably better than he played last season. It's not a nightmare last season because they still won 10 games, but he needs to still take another little step, and that's more in coverage than in run defense. But you're able to bring in those additions and pair with Asa Turner at safety, but the question is, who's behind them? Washington showed a lot last year. Hey, we're going to give some other guys some reps. And that's always kind of where that second and third level has been where other teams came back, where Michigan State came back last year in the third quarter was against a couple of those guys that were not starters. They were, backups that were trying to earn time. They took their licks and they earned valuable playing time. But again, you don't want to dance with the fire too many times. So I think if Washington's able, Elijah Jackson is another guy at cornerback who I'm really excited about. I think this is kind of the year where he's able to put it all together. He's been hurt. Again, another one of those guys. He's been hurt, much like Zion. But I think this is his year. And I think also why they brought in Jabbar to make sure let's secure the boundaries and get bigger in the middle. And that's where Mish and Dom Hampton come in at the Husky and safety positions, along next to Asa, who's kind of that roamer guy who can kind of do a little bit of everything. And I think this secondary not only is better on paper, but I think there's a better structure to it than last season where it was kind of play and react. And it showed last year. And I think this season is going to be a significant improvement.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think as we move into things that could go right, be sure you tune into us tomorrow as we're going to talk a little bit about the Big Ten. And obviously we wanted to give a little bit of time before we get into the big one. I'm sorry. I had to make that pun. I know it's terrible. Please don't just get on me about it. My dad is very proud of making dad jokes, so I feel like I have to work one in every now and again, but we're going to get into that. So be sure you tune in with us tomorrow. But I want to take a second before we talk about what could go right, and because Jabbar Muhammad is one of those things that I really want to talk about where there's a lot that could go right with him. I want to talk a little bit about FanDuel because football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every single victory. You can use those bonus bets on things like spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to place those bets and with America's #1 sportsbook and earn those bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Now, a couple, since they are our sponsor, I had to go through and just look at a couple bets that I think that I would place if, I go down to one of the local casinos and, have some extra money on my hands. We talked about it a little bit before the show, Lars. Jalen Hurts plus 1,200 for MVP. I feel like that's just a great one. These are all futures bets. Nick Bosa feels like another great one at plus 1,200 also to win Defensive Player of the Year. And then, there's some fun over-under spreads. And you talked a little bit about Aaron Rodgers, his new situation as a Patriots fan myself. I was like, don't really want to get too much into that. But over 27.5 touchdowns, I feel like that's a fun place to throw a couple of bucks. So, that's somewhere that I would throw my money. I am this, trust me if you want. That's all I'll say. And again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to place those bets and start earning all those bonus dollars. Now, what could go right? I really wanted to talk about Jabbar Muhammad because he was one guy in the spring where, I'll be honest, he kind of got torched on multiple occasions, mainly by Rome Odunze, who, no fault to Jabbar for that because can you name a single corner on the roster who didn't get cooked by Rome Odunze this spring? Yeah,
It's your initiation at Washington, man. Everyone gets picked. That's when you know you're officially a Husky, is when you've been kicked by around.
Caleb Presley got a big one. But
between that and when he returned the punt, 3-1.
Yeah, no,
those are two rough games
moments. And I think Caleb, former 4-star recruit, is going to be a great player. I don't know how much he might contribute this year to what could go right with this team, but I think that he's going to be very much in the plans for this team's future. And I think that Jabbar Muhammad, if he can come in and be everything that, Jordan Perriman, we saw him during fall camp last year, the transfer from UC Davis. If he was able to stay healthy and be that lockdown corner who really was going toe-to-toe with Rome Odunze on every single snap in fall camp, because that's kind of what Jabbar Muhammad has been able to do over these last couple of weeks. And I asked him about it the other day, and he talked about feeling way more comfortable in the defense. And he loves being out on an island. He loves being able to do those things. And even though Rome Odunze has a lot of height on him, if Jabbar can come in and be the playmaker that we all saw him be at Oklahoma State in the Big 12 last season, I think that he could be a huge piece for this team, because if the Huskies can just drop 20 yards a game from their production, go from 270 to 250 a game, then this team is really, the sky's the limit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the other thing is looking who you're playing in the conference this season. It's all passing quarterbacks, and so you're going to have a secondary that's going to have to defend. Jabbar is going to have to be on one side. Elijah Jackson, I think, is another guy who, if he can put it together, he's always got that 6'1", 6'2" frame. I think he can jump with his vertical is 41 inches now. It was 43 a couple of years ago. He's always been that kind of athletic, like, hey, he's a former jumper. He can get there, but he's never been able to stay healthy and prove it. I think you need both of those if you're Washington to bring that number down, to your point. It's not just Muhammad on once, because if Muhammad's able to lock down another, half the field, if you're still getting cooked on one side, you're still getting cooked on one side. So I think for Washington to reach the levels that I think we both expect they're going to on defense, it's going to have to start from the outside in, not from the inside out.
No, you're absolutely right. And then another thing that I feel like we need to look at when it comes to the defensive side of the ball before we get to the offense, because, I'm always a guy who jinxes things. And so there are a lot of things I don't want to put out into this world, but the offense is going to be fine. I really don't feel like there's a lot to worry about on the offensive side of the ball. So I really want to talk about linebacker, because that's one of the few positions we haven't really gotten into today. And I think when we talk about Edefon Ulofoshio especially, he just looks like he's back. He's healthy. He looks just more rocked up and muscled up than we've ever really seen him before. So I think that this really might be a year where, especially, we haven't seen very good linebacker play from the Huskies over, and it's not just something from last year. This has been going on since 2019, really, where ever since Ben Burke-Kirven left, this team has not really had one solid inside linebacker that, even if, the play next to them is subpar, you can look at that guy and say yes, because Eddie was that guy in 2019, got dinged up a little bit in 2020, still finished out, but 4 games. What are you really going to judge from 4 games? Then 2021 was solid for the first half of the year. Suffered that nasty injury to his arm, I believe it was, and had to sit out the rest of the season. Then while rehabbing, tears his ACL. And, comes back and I believe the Oregon State game last year, plays the last 5 games of the year, looked really good. But now he looks like he's really just been initiated in the defense. I know he likes calling signals, and I know these are all things that we expect him to do this season. So I think there's going to be a lot of just exciting things to think about with Eddie this year, who can, shoot the gaps. He can drop back and play coverage. He can run sideline to sideline, which I know is a cliche, but he's actually somebody who can do that. And I think that a healthy Ulofoshio is probably even a bigger key than the secondary, because if you can't stop the run, you can't stop anything in terms of playing defense.
Well, and to your point, how do you keep Eddie healthy, especially early in this first month of September? You let him get his reps, but you also make sure Carson Bruner, Raylan Goforth, a senior transfer from USC, also gets plenty of playing time, because you don't want to leave Eddie in the third quarter, late third quarter against Tulsa, and he has an unfortunate injury. Because again, like we said, we're not rooting for injuries here, but the more you put players in a chance where, hey, we've already got a 3-touchdown lead, we don't need to be playing our starters, the more you chance it, the more of a risk there is. So I think being able to get Eddie, get those leads in, or beat Boise State handily, or at least by a couple of touchdowns, so the other guys can get their reps. I think that's the way you best build Eddie and the linebacker group up, because we all know the room goes through Eddie, but Eddie also knows to play a full season he can do that, but he doesn't need to play every single snap because he's been at Washington for 6 years. So people already know, especially in the NFL, how good of a linebacker he can be. We just want to see you stay healthy for a full 12, 13 game season.
No, you're absolutely right. And that I don't want Alfonso Tuputala to feel left out of this conversation, because, he's also an excellent player who looks like he could really come into his own this year. And I feel that, if Ulofosho is and can live up to the hype of what we think he can be, Tuputala is going to be the biggest benefactor of that, as he's probably going to have that starting position next to him. Now, let's switch gears here in these last couple minutes, and let's get over to the offensive side of the ball. And do we even really need to talk about the receivers again? Or let's talk about the tight ends. Yeah. I think that's the only thing we haven't done yet. We can talk about Devin Culp. We can talk about Jack Westover, who both look very good. But one guy who I think, if I see things going right this year, we know both those guys, what they can do, what they can contribute. One person who we don't really know what he can be yet, but has really impressed the coaches throughout the offseason, throughout the spring, and now into the fall, is Cal Poly transfer Josh Cuevas. I really, really like what I've seen from Josh Cuevas. He's a big guy, just runs really crisp routes. And I just remember a quote that offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb gave us this spring, where he said, yeah, he blew a couple of guys up today, and I honestly didn't know he could do that. And one thing I know we in the media all love about Ryan Grubb is that he is never one to mince words and just say, like, obviously the first thing that you want any tight end to do on the field is be able to block, unless your name is Travis Kelce. That's a different conversation. Or Mark Andrews, who, separate conversation. Not going to get into that. But Cuevas, he can block, he can run routes, and I think that there's a realistic scenario where he leads all tight ends in not only catches, but touchdowns as well.
See, ironically, you mentioned Travis Kelce. I had that conversation with Nick Sheridan a couple of days ago, where I said, you don't have a Travis Kelce. I said, you don't have a Travis Kelce, and a lot of guys want to, they're coming in saying, hey, I want to be that guy. And one thing that Sheridan, and to your point, the offensive staff prides himself on is versatility. You need to be able to block, but you also need to be able to kick out, and which means you need to be agile. And Cuevas has that perfect 6'5" with 240, 250 frame. I think he's kind of in that range where he's big enough to take the hits. He's also big enough to deliver them, to your point. But he's also a fluid pass catcher. And he really is he had the yard. He was one of the top 3 tight ends, or top 5 tight ends combined FCS, FBS in the country, according to the PFF, if you look at the numbers. So I think he's a very underrated guy. And to your point, it's either going to be him or Westover. I think Culp is going to get kind of like the workman blue-collar numbers, where he's going to get the key ones, but he's not going to have the biggest amount of yards, but he's going to have the most important plays. Cuevas might be the guy, to your point, that has the best at the end of the season, but all 3 guys are going to be a key factor in this.
No, you're absolutely right. And that position, I feel like it could go a really, really long way, because there just aren't a lot of teams in the NCAA that are very well suited to cover tight ends. And I know this is an extreme example and is a whole separate conversation. And I'm sorry to all the recruiting necks out there. Just look at Brock Bowers and look at what he's doing at Georgia. And then, we can have a separate conversation about him in this offense and what that would also look like, which I know we've done off the air many a time at this point in our lives. But I want to thank everybody for listening to the inaugural episode of Lockdown Huskies. Please tune in tomorrow, as we're going to discuss Washington's move to the Big Ten. And feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube and then wherever else you get your podcasts. I'm going to announce this right now. If we can hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube before the season starts, I will buy 2 tickets for one of those random subscribers to the Oregon game. But it has to be done before the season. So this is a really big ask. We really hope that you can help us get there. But, until then, subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe to us and help us win you those Oregon tickets. See you tomorrow.